Nobody in that ballroom had ever seen Nico Vitali afraid. 33 years old, black suit, black shirt open at the collar, ink running up the side of his neck, a gold watch worth more than most of the cars parked outside. When he spoke, grown men lowered their voices. When he walked into a room, people found somewhere else to look. And on that Saturday night in Manhattan, under a chandelier the size of a small car, he was standing beside his grandmother while she raised her glass to make a toast. Adelina Vitali was 79 years old, barely 5 feet tall, white hair pinned up, a cream silk dress, a strand of pearls. She was halfway through a sentence when the glass slipped out of her hand. It hit the marble and shattered. Red wine spread across the floor. Then she went down. What happened in the next 10 seconds is something the people in that room still can't explain. 40 of the most powerful men and women in the city moved at once, and not one of them did the right thing. A man grabbed her under the shoulders to lift her up. Someone pushed a water bottle toward her mouth. A guest dug a pill out of his pocket, absolutely certain he was helping. And Nico Vitali, the man who could empty a room just by walking into it, went down on his knees beside her and didn't know what to do with his own hands. Then one voice cut straight through all of it. Nobody touch her. She was 27. Black shirt, white apron tied at her waist, dark hair coming loose after 11 hours on her feet. Not tall, not delicate, built solid, and standing straighter than anyone else in that room. She'd been working there 11 days. She was the newest hire and the lowest paid person in the building. She pushed a state senator out of her way, pulled a pair of gloves from her apron pocket, and dropped to one knee beside a woman she had never met before in her life. The general manager grabbed her arm and told her she was a waitress. She pulled free without even looking at him. Then she looked straight at Nico Vitali and said the words that stopped the entire room cold. "Your grandmother's having a stroke. Give me 3 minutes or you lose her." And nobody standing there had any idea how she knew that. If a story like this stays with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who'd want to hear it tonight. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. It helps us more than you know. Now let's go back to that ballroom floor and to the 3 minutes that changed everything for a man nobody in this city had ever dared to cross. Cora didn't wait for anyone's permission. She placed 2 fingers against the old woman's neck, counted silently, then looked up at the man kneeling across from her. "Call an ambulance. Right now." Nico didn't move. He looked down at his grandmother's hand, then back at Cora, and in that moment his face went blank, like a child shaken awake in the middle of the night. Cora repeated herself, slower this time, harder. "Take out your phone. Make the call. I'll tell you exactly what to say." He obeyed. His finger slipped across the screen twice before he managed to press the right number. When someone answered on the other end, Cora never took her eyes off the old woman. She simply spoke loudly enough for Nico to hear, enunciating every word. "Say exactly this. Suspected stroke. Elderly female patient. Symptoms began less than 2 minutes ago. Patient is conscious and breathing. Give them the address, the floor, and tell them which entrance is wide enough for a stretcher." Then Cora leaned slightly toward the phone and rattled off a crisp string of letters and numbers, her paramedic badge ID, ensuring dispatch prioritized the call immediately. Nico repeated every sentence like a man reciting something he had memorized. His voice went hoarse on the final word. To Cora's left, a man was still holding a bottle of water. He bent down and started to tip it toward the old woman's mouth. Cora thrust one arm across his path without looking at him. "Put it down." He protested that she needed a little water. Cora still didn't look up. "She can't swallow properly right now. If you pour water into her mouth, it can go straight into her lungs." "Put it down." The bottle was placed on the floor. Then, from behind her, a hand appeared in front of her face, a small white pill resting in the palm. The man holding it said with absolute certainty that he had read somewhere that it thinned the blood, that it saved lives. Cora looked up. She stared directly into his eyes and said only one sentence. "If she's bleeding inside her brain, you just killed her." The hand pulled back. The man took one step away, his face turning white, and he didn't say another word for the rest of that night. The room became so quiet that they could hear the ventilation fan turning overhead. Cora leaned closer. "Can you hear me?" The old woman's eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes, and Cora immediately saw what she had feared. The right side of her face still had strength. The left had fallen slack, pulling down the corner of her mouth and one eyelid, as though someone had suddenly cut every supporting string on that half of her face. "Smile for me. Just smile. It doesn't have to be pretty." The old woman tried. Only the right side lifted. The left remained still. "Good. Now raise both arms for me. Both of them." She lifted her arms. Her right hand rose to chest level. Her left had barely left the floor before it dropped again, not falling from exhaustion, but falling like something that no longer belonged to her. Cora's expression didn't change. "Tell me your name." The old woman's mouth moved. The sound that came out was twisted and blurred, the syllables running together without becoming words. She tried again. And this time there was something in her eyes that Cora had seen hundreds of times and had never learned to get used to. It wasn't pain, it was fear. The fear of someone who had just realized that her own mouth no longer obeyed her. "It's all right, don't force it, just breathe. I'm right here." Cora turned toward Nico. He still had the phone pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on his grandmother, and she realized he was exactly one step away from falling apart. She needed him awake, so she gave him a job. "Your watch." Nico stared at her. "What?" "The watch on your wrist. Look at it. Look right now, and remember the time." He looked down at his wrist. "Got it?" He nodded. "That is the last time your grandmother was normal. Not when the ambulance arrives. Not when you reach the hospital. The moment she went down. When the doctor asks, you don't say around this time. You don't say probably. You give them that exact time. If you forget it, they may not be willing to give her the medication, and she could suffer irreversible brain damage. Do you understand me?" For the first time in his life, someone gave Nico Vitali an order, and for the first time in his life, he followed one without asking a single question. "I remember," he said. Cora reached down to adjust the old woman's head and turn it slightly to one side, and at that exact moment, Lena's right hand lifted, seized Cora's wrist, and squeezed. It wasn't the grasp of a frightened person reaching blindly for whatever happened to be near. It was firm, deliberate, and it refused to let go. Cora stopped for half a beat. The old woman was looking at her, only at her, not at anyone else in that room, not even at her grandson kneeling beside her. "Please let go of my wrist," Cora said softly. "I need to work." Lena didn't let go. Cora had to use her other hand to gently loosen the old woman's fingers one by one, as though untying an old knot. Then she placed that hand against Lena's chest and held it there. Lena turned her head slightly, and from a mouth that no longer obeyed her, she forced out two broken, separate sounds. But no one in that room misunderstood them. Nico dropped the phone onto the stone floor. The siren reached them from the avenue, faint at first like a single thread, then growing louder until it seemed to fill the entire room. The doors flew open. 2 paramedics in uniform pushed a stretcher across the stone floor, and the guests moved aside like water parting around them. The first paramedic dropped to one knee across from Cora, opened his medical bag, and began asking questions. Cora didn't make him finish. Elderly female patient, collapsed where she was standing, witnessed fall, no head impact, left-sided facial droop, left arm weakness, slurred speech, still conscious, still breathing, airway clear, nothing given by mouth, no medication administered. Someone tried to give her water, and someone else tried to give her a pill. I stopped both. Exact symptom onset time has been recorded, and the family member has it. The paramedic's head came up sharply. He looked at the white apron tied around her waist, then back at her face, and for half a second there was a question in his eyes that he didn't have time to ask. The second paramedic had already clipped the monitor onto the old woman's finger. "Medical history? Does she have any conditions? Is she taking any medications?" Cora turned and searched the ring of people standing around them. Who came with her? Who handles her medication every day? A woman stepped forward. She looked to be in her 30s, dressed in a neat coat, and she had been standing behind the old woman's chair for most of the evening, though this was the first time Cora had really noticed her. "I do. I take care of her." Her voice was clear and steady. "She has atrial fibrillation. She takes a blood thinner. Every morning, 1 pill after breakfast. I put it directly in her hand." The paramedic nodded and wrote it down. It was important information, and it had just made everything more complicated, because an anticoagulant already in the patient's system placed a large question mark over every treatment decision that would follow. Cora continued, her voice just as even as when she had asked the old woman whether she could hear her. "Do you have the medication package with you?" The woman blinked. "The package? The blister pack or the bottle? Either one. It will have the name and dosage on it. The hospital will need that. I left it at home. I didn't think I would need to bring it tonight. Do you have a picture of the label on your phone? A lot of people keep one." She shook her head. "No, I know it by heart. I don't need a picture." Cora gave one small nod and asked nothing else. She turned to the paramedic and said, in exactly the same tone she had used when speaking about the airway and the onset time, no faster, no slower, without emphasizing a single word. "Please note that the family reports she takes an anticoagulant, but it hasn't been verified from the medication packaging. Let the hospital confirm it themselves." The paramedic wrote down a line, then moved on, and no one in the room gave the matter another second of thought. The stretcher was lowered. 3 people lifted the old woman together, keeping her head and neck aligned. Cora stood and stepped back, and only then did she realize that her right knee had gone numb from kneeling on the stone floor for so long. Nico followed the stretcher. He had taken 3 steps when he stopped and turned, searching for her through the crowd. He said nothing. He only looked at her once, then kept walking, and the doors closed behind him. The siren faded into the distance. The room began to breathe again. People returned to their tables, picked up their wine glasses, and within a few minutes, someone was laughing. Cora looked down at the place where she had been kneeling. On the stone floor was the puddle of wine, its edges already beginning to dry, and scattered through it were the broken pieces of the glass. She went into the kitchen, got a broom and dustpan, came back out, then knelt again, this time to clean. Wearing gloves, she picked up the larger pieces by hand, swept the smaller shards into the dustpan, then wiped away the wine. No one helped her. No one thanked her. Another server walked past, looked at her, then looked away. When Cora stood with the dustpan in her hand, Preston Vale was already there, both hands clasped behind his back, waiting until she noticed him. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. "Miss Ashland." "Yes. When your shift ends, don't leave. Come up to my office." Cora looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, carried the dustpan through the kitchen doors, and finished the remaining 2 hours of her shift, without saying another word to anyone. The 4th-floor hallway of the hospital had only 1 row of plastic chairs bolted to the wall and a vending machine that hummed through the night. Nico sat at the end of the row with his elbows braced on his knees, and he had been sitting that way long enough that people passing by had stopped looking at him. His men were scattered at both ends of the hallway, and none of them dared sit down. When the door at the far end opened, Nico was on his feet before the woman in the white coat had fully stepped through it. Dr. Helena Brandt was around 50, and spoke in the manner of someone who had spent her entire life delivering sentences no one wanted to hear. "You're Mrs. Vital's grandson?" "I'm her grandson. She's stable. We've completed the imaging and started treatment. She had an acute ischemic stroke, which means a blood clot blocked blood flow to part of her brain. We gave her medication to dissolve the clot." Nico didn't understand all of it, but he understood the word gave. "Does that mean she'll recover?" "It means she received treatment within the permitted window. That's the best thing I can tell you right now." The doctor paused, then continued in a voice meant to make sure he remembered. "Do you know why we were able to give her that medication? Because someone gave us the exact time her symptoms began. Not approximately. Not probably somewhere around then. An exact time. Because someone looked at a clock right there when it happened. The medication we just used is safe only within a very narrow window. After that window, it stops helping and can begin causing harm. If the family had arrived here and told me she collapsed sometime during the evening, I wouldn't have been allowed to use it. I would have had to leave her there and wait." Nico stood completely still. "When it comes to the brain, time isn't about impatience," she said. "Every minute that blood doesn't reach an area, brain cells die, and they don't grow back. You can buy back almost anything in this world. You can't buy that part back." She looked down at the papers in her hand, turned a page, then looked up again. "There's something else I need to ask you. The woman who came with your grandmother told us she takes an oral anticoagulant, 1 pill every day, consistently. That information matters a great deal to us, so we ran tests to confirm it before making our decision. And there was no trace of that medication in her blood." Nico didn't understand at first. Too little? Not too little. None. Not a low level. Not below threshold. No detectable trace at all. And with this medication, a result like that means she hasn't taken it for a long enough period of time that it should concern us. The hallway went silent. The vending machine continued to hum. "I'm asking you plainly," the doctor said. "Are you certain your grandmother has still been taking her medication every day?" Nico opened his mouth. Then he realized he had nothing to say. He knew his grandmother woke early. He knew she made her own coffee. He knew she wouldn't let anyone touch her cooking pot. He knew she had a private caregiver whom he himself had hired and paid for years, precisely so he wouldn't have to remember things like this. He couldn't remember the last time he had actually seen his grandmother holding a pill in her hand. "I don't know," he said. Those were the 3 hardest words he had ever spoken. Dr. Brandt nodded without judgment. "Older people forget. Families assume someone else is taking care of it. We see this all the time. Go back and find out exactly what she's been taking. Bring me the medication packaging. And from now on, someone needs to physically watch her swallow that pill every morning." She had taken several steps away when she stopped. "Whoever gave us that time, you should thank them." Then she walked away. Nico sat down again. He looked at his wrist, at the number still sitting there, and for the first time in his life, he understood that the watch actually had value. Near dawn, Giovanna arrived carrying a thin stack of papers inside a clear plastic folder. Her name is Cora Ashland, Gio said without sitting, 27 years old. She used to work emergency medical services for the New York City Fire Department. And she wasn't just passing through the job, boss. Her unit received a commendation. The language in her evaluations is the kind I don't think I've ever seen written about anyone else. Unusual composure at complex scenes, not one complaint, not one disciplinary action, not one bad mark anywhere in her entire record. Then why is she waiting tables? That's the part I don't understand. Gio turned to the final page and handed it to him. The whole file is thick, and then at the end, there's only one line. Nico took it. The sentence was typed in dry, emotionless language. Nothing more and nothing less. Left the department pending internal review. No reason listed. He read it a second time, then a third, as though another reading might make new words appear. Nothing did. You want me to dig deeper? Gio asked. Somebody always knows something. I can find it in 2 days. Nico stared at the page for a long time. Outside, dawn was beginning to break. No, he said. No? She doesn't owe me anything. He closed the file and handed it back. If I want to know, I'll go ask her myself. Preston Vale's office was at the end of the employee hallway behind the kitchen, and the door was always closed. When Cora walked in, he was already seated behind his desk, and 2 sheets of paper lay side by side in front of him, perfectly aligned, their edges parallel with the edge of the desk. He pointed to the chair across from him. She sat down with both hands resting in her lap and waited. I spoke with the corporation's legal department this morning. Vale began. Would you like to know what they said? If you want to tell me. They used exactly 3 words. Legal liability risk. He turned one of the papers around so she could see it. Miss Ashland, that evening you performed medical assessment procedures on the body of a guest, on the premises of this restaurant, during working hours, while wearing our uniform. You do not hold an active license to practice as a medical professional employed by this establishment. You gave orders to guests. You physically stopped another guest when he attempted to help. You told him he had just killed someone. I told him that if he did it, she could die. Do you know who that man was? No, that is exactly the problem. Vale rested both elbows on the desk. You had been working here for 11 days. You were the newest person in this building. And in those 11 days, you made 3 of our most important guests step backward in the middle of the dining room. Cora said nothing. I know what you're thinking, he continued. You think there is a law protecting people who step in to help. You're right, there is. In this state, someone who gives first aid in good faith during an emergency is protected from being sued. I had legal look into it. No one can sue you for that. No one can touch you on that ground. He paused for exactly 1 beat. But that law does not contain a single sentence requiring me to keep you employed. The words remained between them for a long time. Cora looked at him. And the worst part was that she understood he hadn't lied about a single thing. There was nothing to argue. No provision she could cite. No one she could call. No other door waiting somewhere along this hallway. Everything he had just said was lawful, procedural, and entirely consistent with the way the world worked for someone standing where she stood. This is the termination of your probationary employment, Vale said, pushing the paper toward her. Sign here. Your wages for the days you worked will be deposited at the end of the week. We are not putting anything damaging in your record. I listed the reason as not suited to the position. That is already more generous than it needs to be. Cora picked up the paper and read it from beginning to end, slowly, without skipping a line. Then she set it down. I only have one question. Go ahead. Suppose that night I had done exactly what you wanted. Her voice remained completely normal, not rising even slightly. I stood where I was. I let them lift her up. I let someone pour water into her mouth. Let the other man put that pill in. I stood there holding my tray and waited for the ambulance, exactly the way a server is supposed to. Vale didn't move. Then the next morning, her grandson comes here. She looked directly at him. He sits down at that desk and asks whether there was anyone in this restaurant last night who knew what to do. What would you tell him? Preston Vale opened his mouth. He drew in a breath like a man preparing to speak. Then he closed it again. He looked down at the desk, then at the second sheet of paper, then picked up his pen and turned it between his fingers. And throughout that silence, he couldn't find a single word. Cora waited. She waited long enough for both people in that room to understand that he wasn't going to answer. Then she pulled the paper toward herself, picked up the pen he had just set down, and signed her name. She placed the pen neatly beside the document, stood, pushed the chair back beneath the desk the way people in service work were taught to do, and walked out. In the changing room, she removed her apron, folded it into quarters, and placed it on top of the locker. She hung the locker key on the hook on the wall. No one came to see her out. Beyond the employee entrance was a narrow alley leading to the sidewalk, and by the time she stepped outside, afternoon had settled over the city. Traffic was beginning to thicken, and not one person moving past her knew what she had just walked away from. Cora stopped beside a tree planted along the sidewalk. She took out her phone, opened her banking app, and looked at the number on the screen. Then, she calculated in her head next month's rent, the electric bill, the cost of Junie's 2 physical therapy appointments that insurance only covered halfway, and she understood that she had about 3 weeks. 3 days later, Nico Vitali walked into the Cardinal room, close to noon, while the dining room was still mostly empty, and the staff were folding napkins at the tables in the back. He hadn't called ahead. He walked straight past the waiting area, past the hostess who had already opened her mouth to ask a question, and sat down at the exact table in the middle of the room where his grandmother had stood 3 nights earlier to raise her glass. The stone floor beneath his feet had long since been scrubbed clean. A young waitress approached, her hand trembling slightly, and he ordered a glass of water. Nothing else. Preston Vale appeared less than 2 minutes later, both hands clasped in front of his stomach, his face already arranged into the expression he reserved for his most important guests. Mr. Vitali, I didn't know you would be joining us today. First, please allow me to ask about your grandmother. We've all been thinking about her. It was truly a terrible night for everyone. Sit down. Vale sat. The waitress placed the water on the table and retreated quickly. Nico didn't touch the glass. He looked slowly around the dining room, like a man calculating square footage. This is a beautiful building, he said. A ceiling like that isn't something you can just get anywhere. Yes, we're very proud of the space. Your restaurant leases the property, right? Vale blinked. Yes, from a property management company. I know that company. They borrowed money to purchase this building. That loan sits with a bank headquartered about 10 blocks from here. Nico was still speaking in the tone of a man discussing the weather. There is a man on that bank's board. Years ago, he found himself in a very difficult situation, the kind of situation that, if it ever became public, his children would have had to read about in the newspapers. He came to me. I helped him. Nico brought his eyes back to Vale. I haven't asked him for anything since. No one spoke for a while. You see how long that chain is? Nico asked. From where you're sitting to that man. 4 links. The tenant, the company, the bank, and 1 phone call. Vale lifted a hand to loosen his collar, then lowered it when he realized what he was doing. Mr. Vitali, if this is about Miss Ashland, I would like the chance to explain. The decision was completely consistent with procedure. Corporate legal advised us. I have it in writing. She was still in her probationary period. And I didn't ask whether it followed procedure. But sir, I know it did, Nico said. That's the worst part. Vale fell silent. That night, I was on my knees on your floor, Nico said. My grandmother was lying there. There were 40 people in this room who had probably never had to wait for anything in their lives, and not one of them knew what to do. Neither did I. One person did. Do you remember what you were doing? Vale looked down at the table. You grabbed her arm, Nico said. You pulled her away from my grandmother. Then you told her she was just a serving girl. Vale started to apologize. Nico raised 1 finger, and he stopped. Don't apologize to me. I didn't lose anything. My grandmother is still here. He pushed the glass of water aside without taking a sip. The person you need to apologize to is the woman you just fired. And I don't care how you do it. Call her. Go to her. Figure it out yourself. I'll only tell you one thing. If I hear that you did it only because I was sitting here this morning, it doesn't count. Vale looked up. Then what do you want from me, Mr. Vitali? Nico stood. He fastened the button of his suit jacket slowly and looked down at the man still seated across from him. The next time someone collapses in this dining room, he said, I want you not to have to ask legal what to do first. Then he took out his wallet and placed a bill on the table beside the untouched glass of water. He smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. He said nothing about the money, didn't look at it again, and walked out. Preston Vale remained alone in the empty dining room, staring at the bill beside the glass no one had touched, and it took him a long time to realize that his own hands were still clasped tightly together on the table. The apartment was on the ground floor of an old building in Queens, and that was the only reason Cora had chosen it. There was no elevator to wait for, no set of steps that required anyone's help, and once the door opened, the sidewalk was right there. The landlord had raised the rent twice in 2 years, and she had stayed anyway, because within walking distance of the hospital, it was the only place she had been able to find. When she unlocked the door and stepped inside that afternoon, the first thing she heard was a heavy thud from the living room, followed by her sister's voice. I'm fine. Stay right there. Cora still put down her bag and walked in. Junie was lying on her side on the floor, one hand braced against the rug, her wheelchair locked behind her, and the low armchair about an arm's length away. Her hair had fallen loose across half her face. I said, "I'm fine. Stay right there. I haven't touched you. You're thinking about touching me. I can tell by your face." Cora folded her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "I'm thinking about making tea." "That is an outrageous lie." Junie pressed down with her elbow, shifted her hips, and started inching toward the chair. Halfway there, she stopped to catch her breath. "This chair keeps getting farther away, you know. I think it moves by itself at night, probably because I clean the floor." "Since when do you clean the floor?" Junie pushed again, managed to get half her body onto the edge of the chair. Her hand slipped, and she dropped back onto the rug for the second time. She lay flat on her back, let out a breath, then laughed. "All right, the chair wins today. Tomorrow I settle the score. How long have you been practicing?" "I don't know. Since that cooking show started until the woman finished making the cake." Cora looked up at the television, which was playing with the sound off, then back down at her sister. "That cake took 40 minutes. Then I guess it's been 40 minutes. This time Cora walked over, not to help her up. She lowered herself onto the rug beside her sister, stretched out her legs, and the two of them sat there together staring at the ceiling for a while. "You smell strange," Junie said. "Thank you." "No, I mean you're home early today." "Short shift, short shift." Junie repeated the last word slowly. "That restaurant has never given anyone a short shift. You've only worked there 11 days, and I already know your schedule better than you do. They rearranged things." Junie turned her head and looked at her sister. She looked a little too long, the way someone looks when another question is about to come. Then she didn't ask it. She only held out her hand. "Fine. Help me up once. Just once. And this is me giving permission. Not you deciding for yourself." Cora slipped her hands under her sister's arms, and together they lifted. Junie managed to sit in the chair, adjusted her legs with both hands, then exhaled. "See, everything is easier when people cooperate. I'm writing that down and reading it back to you next week. Next week I'll deny ever saying it." That evening, the sisters ate noodles in front of the television and argued about which one of them had used the last of the sauce the previous time. Cora said nothing about the paper she had signed, about the apron folded into quarters and left on top of the locker, about the key hanging from the hook. She thought about all of it through the entire meal and said nothing. Junie went to bed first. Cora washed the dishes, wiped down the table, turned off the living room lights, then went into her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the darkness for a long time. After that, she stood, opened the closet door, and reached for the highest shelf. There was a cardboard box up there. Its four corners had softened with age, and the lid had been sealed with a strip of clear tape that had turned yellow, carefully pressed down, completely sealed, the kind of taping done by someone who had no intention of opening it again. She carried it down, placed it on the bed, and sat looking at it. Then she slipped a fingernail beneath the edge of the tape and peeled it away. Inside, neatly folded, was a uniform. The dark blue fabric had faded at the elbows. The embroidered department patch was still sewn to the chest, and beneath it was her name. Cora didn't take it out. She only rested one hand on top of it, feeling that the fabric was stiffer than she remembered, then drew her hand back. Beside the uniform, lying by itself in one corner of the box, was a handkerchief. White linen, faded now to ivory, soft from having passed through someone's hands for many years. In one corner was a line of hand embroidery in pale blue thread, the stitches small and even, the kind of work people hardly did anymore. Cora stared at that handkerchief for a very long time. She didn't touch it. Then she closed the lid, pressed the old strip of tape back down so it would stick as it had before, carried the box up, and returned it to the highest shelf, exactly where it had always been. She closed the closet door. Then she went to sleep. Sloane Marchetti didn't have to do much. All she needed was one afternoon, one name, and an acquaintance who worked as an editor for an online news site that specialized in covering the city's wealthy elite. She sent him exactly what needed to be sent, and not one word more. The full name, the place where Cora had once worked, and a copied line from her record, the line stating that she had left the profession while an internal review was pending. No conclusion, no explanation. Sloane understood perfectly well that a story told halfway was always more destructive than a story told in full. The article went up on Tuesday morning. The headline was phrased as a question, the kind of headline that allowed the writer to deny having actually claimed anything. The story said that the woman being praised for saving the grandmother of one of the city's most powerful families turned out not to have been an ordinary server at all, that she had once worked in emergency medical services, that she had left the profession while an internal review with no publicly known outcome was still underway, and that she had applied to work at that restaurant not long before the dinner, The article didn't accuse her of anything. It simply placed those facts beside one another in that exact order and allowed the readers to do the rest. The readers did the rest very quickly. Beneath the article, people told one another that of course the whole thing had been staged, that someone could spend an entire career in emergency medicine without saving anyone famous, and then somehow end up at that exact table on that exact night. Someone wrote that only a calculating person would think to look at a clock while another human being was dying. Someone else wrote that a few days on the job was more than enough time to learn who sat at which table. Another person wrote that if you put on a good enough performance, you got a big reward. And beneath that comment were several hundred marks of approval. Many of those people had never set foot inside the restaurant, had never met her, and would forget her name within 3 days. But that morning they all had time to spare, and they all had phones in their hands. Junie saw the article in the middle of the afternoon. She was scrolling through her phone while waiting for Cora to come back from the grocery store when the story appeared on her screen because someone from an old group of friends had shared it with a comment attached. Junie read the entire article. Then she read the comments. She kept reading for a long time, scrolling down, then farther down, her face growing paler with every passing minute. Eventually she turned off the screen, placed the phone face down on her lap, and sat motionless in the empty living room. She didn't know whom she was supposed to be angry with. Cora came home carrying 2 grocery bags, and while putting things into the refrigerator, Junie sat in her wheelchair watching her sister's back. She meant to say something. Twice, she opened her mouth. Then, she thought about the fact that if Cora hadn't seen the article yet, Junie would be the one who had to tell her, and she didn't have the courage to do that, so she stayed quiet. The sisters spoke less than usual over dinner that night. Cora washed the dishes for a very long time. She wiped the sink again and again, even after it was already clean. Junie noticed everything. Close to 11 o'clock that night, Junie was already in bed when she heard the bathroom door close. Then the faucet came on. Not the way someone turns it on to wash their face and shuts it off again, but all the way, left running, the water pouring without stopping. Junie lay still and listened. The bathroom was directly beside her room, and the wall between them was so thin that for years the sisters had joked about it. She heard the water. Then beneath the sound of the water, she heard something else, very quiet, forced down, muffled behind something. Perhaps a hand, perhaps a towel. It came in broken pieces, then stopped, then escaped again. Junie lay staring at the ceiling. She had lived beside her sister through days neither of them ever spoke about anymore, through long nights in hospitals, through the season when the two of them had eaten nothing but rice and eggs, and in all that time she had never once heard that sound from Cora. She started to move toward her wheelchair. Her hand had already reached the side of it. Then she stopped, because she understood why her sister had turned on the faucet, and walking through that door now would take away the only thing Cora still had left to herself that night. So Junie drew her hand back. She lay down again, pulled the blanket up, and listened until the sound of the water finally stopped. Sloane Marchetti arrived late the following afternoon without an appointment, carrying a box of pastries from the shop in Bensonhurst that Lena had always liked. She knew Nico was in the office above the shop, knew what hours he would be there, and knew his men wouldn't stop her. No one did. She placed the box on the corner of his desk and sat down in the chair across from him without waiting to be invited. "I heard your grandmother has started saying a few words again. I'm very glad. Thank you. You look like you haven't slept much." She let the silence linger for a moment, then continued in a softer voice. "My father says this city has been talking too much these past few weeks. He says that at times like this, families should stay close to each other. He's been saying that since I was a little girl. You know that." Nico didn't answer. "I was only thinking," she said. "There are things both families have understood for a long time without anyone ever needing to say them out loud. Maybe this is the right time to finally say them." Nico opened a desk drawer. He took out a thin stack of papers held together by a metal clip and pushed it across the desk toward her. He didn't say a single word. Sloane looked at the papers. She didn't pick them up immediately. Then she did. Turned the first page, and Nico saw the exact moment her face changed, even though she tried very hard not to let it. Printed across those pages was every message she had exchanged with the editor, complete with dates and times. There was the message where she sent Cora's name. There was the one where she sent the photograph of the personnel record. There was the message telling him not to write it like an accusation. Just put the facts beside one another and let people draw their own conclusions. The final page was a copy of the transfer order, the account number, and the amount she had paid him. "Your father has already read it," Nico said. Sloane looked up. "He called me this morning. He called before you did." She lowered the papers onto the desk. Her hand was perfectly steady, but she took slightly longer than necessary to let go of them. "What are you going to do to me?" Nico looked at her. He looked for quite a while, and there was no anger in his eyes. No contempt either. Only something she wasn't accustomed to having directed at her. Complete indifference. Nothing, he said. You mean that? I do. Sloane let out a short breath, almost a laugh. Then I don't understand why you asked me to come here. I didn't ask you. You came on your own. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street below, where someone was pulling down the awning of the bakery for the evening. Do you know why people in this city call you? He said. It isn't because they like you. It isn't because they owe you anything. They call because they think being close to you means being close to me. You've lived on that for years, and you've been very good at it. I've never blamed you for that. He turned and looked at her. Beginning next week, those calls will start coming less often. No one will announce anything. No one will throw you out of anywhere. People will simply stop thinking of you when they arrange the tables for a dinner. Then you'll message a few people, and they'll take longer to answer than they used to. Then one evening you'll sit somewhere and realize that no one in the room is looking in your direction anymore. Sloane said nothing. That's the punishment, Nico said. I don't have to do anything. I only have to do nothing. He picked up the pastry box from the corner of the desk, opened it, glanced inside, then pushed it back toward her. Take this home. My grandmother doesn't eat store-bought pastries. She makes her own. Then he walked out of the room without looking back, leaving her sitting there alone with the box and the stack of papers on the desk. Junie called the hospital on a Thursday morning while her sister was out. She had looked it up online several days earlier and knew she had the right to do it. She was 19 years old. She was the patient, and no one was allowed to refuse her a copy of her own medical records. The woman in the records department asked which admission she needed. Junie gave her the date. The woman asked which part of the file she wanted. Junie was quiet for a moment, then said the initial intake notes, the part they wrote down when she was first brought in. The records arrived by mail 5 days later, in a large brown envelope, and Junie sat in her wheelchair in the middle of the living room and opened it while she was alone in the apartment. She read very slowly. There were many words she didn't understand, but on the second page, inside the box for information handed over from the scene, there was one line printed in capital letters, and that line she understood immediately. Name of first responder at scene. Ashland. C. Junie sat staring at those words until it grew dark outside. When Cora came home, Junie didn't greet her. She was sitting in the middle of the living room with the lights off, the file resting on her lap. Cora stopped in the doorway. Junie? Sit down. What's wrong? Sit down. Cora sat on the edge of the chair. Junie handed her the papers, already open to the second page, one finger resting on that line. Cora looked down. She didn't take the file. She only looked at it. And Junie saw her sister's shoulders lower slightly, like someone finally setting down something she had been carrying for far too long. You were there, Junie said. Junie, don't talk to me like that anymore. It's been 3 years. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't tremble. They told me Mom died right there, that no one had time to do anything. You let me believe that for 3 years. Now I'm holding a piece of paper that says you were the first person on the scene. Tell me what happened. From the beginning. Cora was silent for a very long time. Then she spoke, and her voice sounded like someone reading something she had memorized, but had never once said aloud. I was working the night shift. We got a call about a collision on the highway. My unit was the closest, so we arrived first. The second unit was still a long way off, because there was another emergency on the other side of the city that night. Then what? I got out. I walked toward the car. Then I saw the license plate. Junie said nothing. I recognized the car before I recognized the people inside it, Cora said. My partner that night was handling the other vehicle. I was alone at that car. There were 2 people inside. Mom and you. Then what did you do? I did what they taught me to do. Cora looked down at her hands. When there are several patients and only one rescuer, you don't save the person you love most. You assess each one, very quickly, and you start with the person who has the best chance of surviving. That's the rule. They taught me that from the first days of training, and I had followed that rule hundreds of times with strangers. But that day they weren't strangers. No. Did you assess Mom first or me first? I assessed both of you, in much less time than you probably imagine. Cora paused. Then I turned toward you. Junie sat perfectly still. I worked on you until the second unit arrived, Cora said. Then I handed you over to them and went back. She didn't continue. She didn't need to. Mom was gone before you got back to her, Junie said. Yes. No one turned on the lights in the living room. Outside the window, a bus stopped, and then pulled away again. So the review mentioned in your record, Junie said. It was mandatory procedure. When an emergency responder treats a member of their own family, they have to review everything afterward. They concluded that I did the right thing. There were no mistakes. Then why did you leave? Cora looked up at her sister. Because they concluded that I did the right thing, she said. Junie understood immediately. She didn't ask another question. She rolled her wheelchair closer, then closer still, until the wheels touched the legs of the chair. Then she reached out with both hands, took hold of her sister's wrists, and pulled them down until Cora's hands were level with her face. Look at me, Cora did. For 3 years, you've been putting yourself in prison for that decision, Junie said. You left the profession, you went to wash dishes, you taped that box shut, and couldn't bring yourself to open it again. I don't know what has been happening inside your head, but I know you've been sentencing yourself every single day. Junie, I'm not finished. She tightened her grip. I'm still sitting here. Cora began to shake her head. I'm still sitting here, Cora, Junie said. I am the proof. The envelope arrived on an ordinary morning, mixed in with the stack of mail delivered to the office above the bakery. No stamp, no postmark, only Nico's name handwritten across the front. Gio opened it first, as he did with everything sent there, then stood motionless in the middle of the room for a while before carrying it inside. There were 3 things in it. The first was an unopened blister pack of medication, every tablet still intact, with the name of the drug and the dosage printed clearly on the foil backing. The second was a pharmacy receipt folded into quarters, showing the date of purchase, the name of the medication, and the purchaser's name, Adelina Vitali. The third was a small handwritten note, the lettering neat and careful, like the handwriting of someone accustomed to keeping records, with only 1 line. What she takes every morning isn't this. Nico read the sentence 3 times. Then he picked up the blister pack, turned it in his hand, and thought about Dr. Brandt, about the 4th floor hallway, about the question he hadn't been able to answer. The hospital, he said. Someone there must have noticed something was wrong and sent this. That's what I thought too, Gio said. But look at the receipt, boss. It isn't from the hospital. It's from a pharmacy in Bensonhurst, 3 blocks from your grandmother's house. Nico looked down at the receipt. Then he looked again at the handwriting on the note, and something inside his chest seemed to shift. Bring her up here, he said. Renata Cardoso arrived that same afternoon. She brought nothing with her. No lawyer, no handbag, no prepared explanation. She walked into the room, saw the blister pack and the receipt lying on the desk, and gave one very small nod, the kind of nod a person gives when they realize everything has finally reached the place it was meant to reach. You received it, she said. You sent it. Yes. Why didn't you run? Renata pulled out the chair and sat without waiting to be invited, because she knew she had nothing left to stand on ceremony for. Where would I run, sir? No one in the room spoke. Gio stood by the door with his arms hanging at his sides. Tell me, Nico said. From the beginning? She did, and the calmness of her voice was frightening. I kept buying the real medication every month. I went to that pharmacy, brought the receipt home, and put everything in the same place as always. But what I gave her every morning wasn't the real medication. Since when? Around the beginning of summer. What did you give her? Calcium supplements. Same color, same size. She never looked closely. She swallowed them with her coffee and went to make bread. Nico placed both hands on the desk. You knew she had atrial fibrillation. I knew. You knew what that medication was for. Yes, sir. I knew very well. I read everything I could find about it. Renata said. That's the worst part of me, sir. I wasn't ignorant. I knew exactly what I was doing every morning. Nico was silent for a very long time. There were 3 days, she continued, when I put the real medicine back. He looked up. 3 separate days, not in a row. Some mornings I would stand in her kitchen, holding the pill while she was singing in the next room. She sings that song she always sings when she's kneading dough. I would put the real pill in her hand, and for a little while I could breathe again. She stopped. Then the next morning, I would give up again. Why? Because after one morning there was always another morning, sir, and that debt was still there. Nico waited. My son needed heart surgery, Renata said. Insurance refused to cover it. I borrowed money, not from a bank. Banks don't lend people like me that kind of money. I borrowed somewhere else. Then someone came to me and said they now held that debt, and if I did one thing for them, the debt would disappear. What thing? They didn't tell me to hurt your grandmother. She looked directly at him. They were very clear that I wasn't supposed to let her die. They only wanted her weaker. They wanted her to forget more, become more confused, so people would see that she was no longer mentally capable. I asked twice because I couldn't understand why anyone would want that. Nico sat very still. Who? He said. Renata didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. That night at the restaurant, she said, when the waitress asked me what medication your grandmother took, I answered smoothly. I answered smoothly because I had practiced that sentence in my head for months. Then she asked me where the medication package was. Renata looked up, and I stood there in the middle of that dining room and realized that I had almost killed your grandmother with the very answer I had rehearsed. She placed both hands on the desk. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm only asking you to let this end with me. Renata Cardoso left with 2 of Gio's men, and she never gave them a name because no one had ever given her one. All she could describe was an older man, well-dressed, who had met her twice in 2 different cafes, and a phone number that had since been disconnected. Gio needed 4 days. He came back in the evening, placed a file on the desk, and remained standing instead of sitting down. Where do you want me to start, boss? With the loan. That loan changed hands twice before it reached the place where it sits now. The first man who lent her the money was a pawnbroker in Bay Ridge. Small operation, nothing anyone would notice. Then someone bought the debt from him. Then that person sold it again to a company. What company? A company with no office, boss. Just a name and a mailbox. I had to go through the business registration records before I could find the person behind it. Gio stopped. Boss, sit down. I'm already sitting. It's your uncle. Nico said nothing. He sat perfectly still, and Gio could see that both hands resting on the desk hadn't moved at all. Uncle Rocco, Gio said. Not an intermediary. Not somebody who knows somebody. Him. Keep going. At first I thought the same thing you did. I thought he wanted your grandmother gone so he could take something. But the more I read, the more I realized it was the opposite. He was very specific that she wasn't supposed to die. Why? Because if she died, he got nothing. Gio opened the file and turned to a page near the middle. Do you remember the properties your grandmother used to keep in her own name? The bakery, those buildings in Brooklyn, the old workshop. I remember. That's the entire clean side of the family business, boss. Clean from the beginning. Clear books, taxes paid, no connection to anything else. My grandmother built that with her own hands. Yes, and she has kept all of it in her own name for all these years, even though everyone kept telling her it would be easier to transfer it to you. Gio looked at him. I think there was a reason she never did. Nico remained silent. She kept it there for you, Gio said. So if the day ever came when you wanted to walk away from everything else, you would still have somewhere to step into. Outside the window, the street below had gone dark. Tell me about the paperwork, Nico said. In the power of attorney she signed a long time ago, there is a clause. If she dies, everything goes to you. Clear. No room for argument. But if she is still alive, and a court declares that she no longer has the mental capacity to manage her own property, control doesn't pass to you. Who does it pass to? The oldest surviving blood relative in the family. Nico closed his eyes for a moment. So he didn't need her dead, he said. He needed her alive. Alive and confused, Gio said. Alive and forgetting. Alive with people around her who could testify that she was forgetting. He turned another page. And this is the part that chilled me, boss. A few months ago, some of the family people who were always coming and going around her started keeping notes. The day she called one grandchild by the wrong name. The day she left her keys in the lock. The day she asked the same question twice during dinner. Little things. Things old people do all the time. But someone was writing down the dates and times properly and making sure it happened in front of other people, so those people could later sign as witnesses. He had been preparing it for a long time. Then the medication. The medication was there to speed things up, Gio said. Without anticoagulants, clots are more likely to form in the brain, and if someone has several small clots over time, they can slow down, forget things, become confused, and no one has to blame anyone for it. He never planned for one large clot to hit her right in the middle of a dinner. Nico opened his eyes. Anything else? Gio pulled out the final document and slid it across the desk. Petition for guardianship. Filed with the court 10 days after the night at the restaurant. Nico picked it up. The petition was thick, neatly assembled, with attachments, a witness list, and a sworn statement from someone claiming to have cared for Lena for years. You see how thick that is, boss, Gio said. 10 days. Your grandmother still couldn't say a full sentence at that point. Nobody in the world puts all of this together in 10 days. Nico lowered the petition onto the desk. Unless it had already been prepared, he said, and they were only waiting for the date to file it. Cora went to the hospital one morning carrying 2 oranges, because she had no idea what to bring for someone she had never truly spoken to. Lena was sitting propped against the pillows, and when Cora entered, the old woman turned her head very slowly, but she recognized her immediately. Her right hand lifted. Cora walked over, and Lena took her hand exactly as she had that night, firmly, deliberately, refusing to let go. Hello, ma'am, Cora said. How are you feeling? Lena opened her mouth. Only a few broken sounds came out. Nothing that formed a sentence. She tried again, then gave up, and Cora saw in her eyes the frustration of someone who had spent her entire life being able to say exactly what she wanted to say. "You don't have to talk. I'll just sit here with you for a while." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she lifted her good hand and tapped 2 fingers against the center of her chest. Twice. Then she pointed at Cora. Then she tapped her chest again. Cora didn't understand. "Does it hurt here?" Lena shook her head, and there was impatience in the movement. She released Cora's hand, pulled up the sleeve of her hospital gown, then reached underneath, searching for something. She pulled out the cuff of the thin sweater she was wearing beneath it. The old sweater she had insisted her grandson bring from home. She held the cuff up in front of Cora and kept it there. Along the edge of the sleeve, near the seam, was a line of hand embroidery in pale blue thread, small, even stitches. Cora looked at it. She looked for quite a while, and something stirred faintly inside her mind. A vague sense of familiarity she couldn't name, like hearing a melody she once knew, but could no longer remember the song. Then a medication cart rattled past in the hallway, and Cora released Lena's hand to move out of the way. When she turned back, the old woman had closed her eyes from exhaustion. Cora pulled the blanket higher over her and left. That afternoon, Nico came to the apartment in Queens. He stood outside the door holding an envelope, and when Cora opened it, he didn't step inside right away. "I won't bother you for long," he said. "This belongs to you." She took it. The envelope was still sealed, with the fire department seal in one corner. "What is it?" "The final report from the internal review. I requested it formally, through the proper channels. That news site published half the story, and they'll only take it down if we can give them the other half." "You've read it?" "No." She looked at him. "It's your file," he said, "not mine." Cora stood still for a moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. He came inside. The apartment was small, and he had to walk around the empty wheelchair beside the armchair. She went into the kitchen to get water. Nico stopped in the middle of the living room, and his eyes settled on the low table in front of the chair. Folded into quarters on top of it was a handkerchief. Linen, faded to ivory, softened by time. In one corner was a line of hand embroidery in pale blue thread. He didn't pick it up. He only stood there. And when Cora came back carrying 2 glasses of water, she found him staring down at the table, his entire body motionless in the same way she had seen only once before, on the ballroom floor when his grandmother had called his name. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer immediately. 3 years ago, he said. "My grandfather died in the hospital, from the same condition. They got him there too late." Cora set down the 2 glasses. "I was late that night," he said. "I was somewhere. I don't even remember where anymore, and by the time I arrived, it was over. I walked through the hallway downstairs on my way to the elevator." He stopped. My grandmother was sitting there, on one of those plastic chairs along the wall. She was sitting beside a young woman in an emergency medical uniform. Cora didn't move. "The woman had her head lowered," Nico said. "I couldn't see her face clearly. All I saw was my grandmother holding her hand." He looked down at the handkerchief on the table. I kept walking. No one spoke. "I thought it belonged to someone else's life," he said. "I thought it had nothing to do with me." He was silent for a long time. The next day my grandmother came home, and the handkerchief she had kept since my grandfather was alive, the one she carried in her pocket for decades, was gone. I asked about it. She wouldn't tell me. She has never told me since. Cora looked down at the table. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "That night I was sitting on the hallway floor," she said. "I was still wearing my uniform. I couldn't make myself stand up, and I couldn't cry either. I just sat there." She drew in a breath. "Then an old woman sat down beside me. She didn't ask me anything. She didn't ask my name, didn't ask what had happened, didn't ask whether I was all right. She only placed this handkerchief in my hand." "What did she say?" Cora looked up at him. She said, "Cry, sweetheart. Crying doesn't mean you've given up." Nico Vitali stood in the middle of that small living room, and he couldn't say a single word. The room behind the old bakery in Bensonhurst had never been renovated. The walls were still paneled in dark wood. The same long table where Nico's grandfather had once sat was still there, and the smell of baking flour still drifted in from the front of the shop. The Vitali family hadn't held a meeting there in years. That night they filled both sides of the table. No one ordered coffee, no one took off a coat, and no one spoke while they waited. Nico stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He placed the file Gio had given him on the worn wood, opened it, and left it there. But no one in the room leaned down to read, because every one of them had known what was inside before walking through the door. "I'm only saying this once," he said. "Beginning tonight, the name Rocco Vitali no longer belongs to anything carrying this family's name. No share, no vote, no voice. He is not allowed inside any business we own. He does not sit at any table of ours, and his name is not to be mentioned in any of our business again." No one nodded. No one objected. And I want this part understood, he continued. Beginning tonight, anyone who still takes his calls stands on his side as far as I'm concerned. There is no listening just to know what he wants. There is no doing it out of respect for old ties. Anyone who has a problem with that can stand up and leave right now. I won't stop you, and I won't ask twice. No one stood. Halfway down the table, an older man cleared his throat and then thought better of it. Someone shifted a foot beneath the table, and the scrape of a chair against the tile sounded far louder than it should have. Then Gio Rena, standing behind Nico, asked the question the entire room had been waiting for. He asked it in an ordinary voice, without emphasis, without raising it. Exactly the voice he used when asking which car they were taking that night. And if it goes beyond that, boss? Nico didn't answer. He looked down at the table. The hanging light above them cast a dull yellow circle across the worn wood, and he stared into the center of it. No one moved. The man seated closest to the door stopped breathing so heavily. Somewhere in the bakery out front, a metal tray struck a rack. Nico still said nothing. The silence stretched too long to be called an ordinary pause, and everyone in the room understood that. It lasted long enough that people began counting the seconds inside their own heads without realizing they were counting. With every second that passed, the silence said more clearly what no one in that room needed spoken aloud. One man looked down at his hands, another looked toward Nico, then immediately looked away. And until the final second of that silence, not one person in the room doubted what the man standing at the head of the table was about to say. Then the door behind them opened. No one had heard a knock. The woman pushing the wheelchair was a privately hired nurse, her face pale because she knew exactly where she had just brought that chair, and the wheelchair rolled across the threshold, one wheel squeaking against the old tile. Lena sat in it wearing a thin sweater over her clothes, both hands resting in her lap. The entire room stood. No one ordered them to. They rose as if by instinct. All at once, the scrape of chairs rushing backward before falling silent again. Nico stepped toward her. Grandma, what are you doing here? Who brought you? Lena didn't answer him. She looked around the room once, taking in every face slowly, and every man whose eyes she reached lowered his head. Then she looked back at her grandson. No one knew how long she had been sitting outside that door, but when she opened her mouth, every person there understood that she had heard enough. She spoke very slowly. The left side of her face still refused to obey her completely, so every word had to be pushed out separately, and she had to rest between them. I'm still sitting here. She stopped to breathe. Because of someone, another pause, who didn't know me. No one in the room dared breathe too loudly. She looked directly into Nico's eyes. Now what are you going to do? She forced out the final words, and they cost her more strength than all the others combined. To someone. I do know? Nico stood there. He looked at his grandmother for a very long time. Then he turned toward Gio. Call the lawyers tonight, he said. I want the objection to the guardianship petition filed with the court as soon as possible. I want this heard in open court. I want a court reporter there. Reporters sitting in the gallery. Everything recorded in black and white. Gio didn't move. Boss, you heard me. You understand that if we do that, the entire city will know what happened inside this family. I understand. If we go to court, we have to open the books. We have to produce your grandmother's records. We have to let people look into places no one has been allowed to look for decades. Gio lowered his voice. Boss, you just cut off your own hand. Nico looked down at his grandmother. Her right hand was searching for his, and when she found it, she took hold of him firmly, deliberately, refusing to let go. No, he said. I just put down the knife. The hearing opened on a late autumn morning in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor of the county courthouse, and the public gallery was already packed before the session began. There were reporters. There were people from the old circles Nico hadn't seen in years. Sloane Marchetti sat in the 4th row beside her father, who had forced her to come, and throughout that entire morning, she didn't speak a word to anyone. Lena sat in her wheelchair in the front row beside her grandson. Rocco Vitali sat across the aisle in a neatly pressed coat, and he didn't look toward his mother even once. His attorney was a man with salt and pepper hair and a pleasant voice, the kind of man who knew how to make something terrible sound merely unfortunate. The morning passed through procedural matters and sworn statements. Close to noon, Nico's side asked permission to play the recording of the emergency call from that night, to establish Lena's condition before and after the onset of her symptoms. The clerk pressed a button. The dispatcher's voice filled the courtroom, followed by the voice of a man speaking into the phone, hoarse and short of breath, repeating every sentence as though he had memorized it. And behind that voice, farther away but clearly audible, was a woman's voice feeding him the words. Suspected stroke. Elderly female patient. Symptoms began less than 2 minutes ago. Patient is conscious and breathing. Then the woman's voice added a short sequence of syllables. Steady, clear, a string of letters and numbers spoken without pause. Exactly the way someone reads something they have recited thousands of times. The recording stopped. Almost no one in the courtroom paid any attention to that sequence. It had passed in less than 2 seconds. But Rocco Vitale's attorney snapped his head up and asked that the recording be played again. The clerk replayed it. He listened. Then he stood, fastened the button of his jacket, and turned toward Cora, who was seated in the witness section. Miss Ashland, did you hear that part clearly? Yes, sir. Can you tell the court what the sequence of characters you read aloud in that recording was? Cora was silent for a moment. It was my number. What kind of number, Miss Ashland? My emergency medical services identification number, issued by the New York City Fire Department. When was that issued to you? When I entered the profession. And when did you leave the profession? 3 years ago. The attorney nodded slowly, as though he had just heard something that saddened him. Then he turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I would like to call attention to a very serious point. During an official emergency call, the very call upon which the entire course of subsequent treatment depended, this woman stated the identification number of a medical responder serving within a public agency. The problem is that at the time, she was no longer employed by that agency. She was working as a server in a restaurant. He allowed the sentence to settle. I don't need to use inflammatory language. I only ask the court to consider this. A person invoking an official identity she was no longer entitled to carry, at the scene itself, in a situation where everyone around her was panicked and prepared to believe anyone who spoke with authority. The entirety of this witness's testimony, Your Honor, should be reconsidered from the beginning. A murmur moved through the courtroom. A reporter in the back row bent over and began writing rapidly. Nico started to rise, and his attorney placed a hand on him and held him back. The judge turned toward Cora. Would you like to respond, Miss Ashland? Cora didn't answer. She bent down, opened the cloth bag at her feet, and took out a thin stack of papers fastened with a blue paperclip. She stood, walked several steps to the clerk's table, and placed it down. I would like to submit this, Your Honor. The clerk handed it to the judge. The judge turned the first page, then the second, and stopped. She continued more slowly. Inside were receipts showing payment of the fees required to renew Cora's professional certification, year after year, without a single year missed. Attached were records of the mandatory continuing education hours, with columns for dates, course names, and verification signatures. And in the column showing when the training had been completed, nearly all of it fell late in the evening or during online classes taken deep into the night. Miss Ashland, the judge said, have you worked any emergency shifts during the past 3 years? No, Your Honor. Not one? Not one. I haven't stepped into an ambulance once. Then why did you keep paying these fees? Cora stood there with both hands clasped in front of her, and when she answered, her voice was quiet, slightly hesitant, almost like someone apologizing for having done something a little foolish. I don't really know how to explain it, Your Honor, she said. Whenever the renewal came due, I paid it. Some months I had to save for it. I took the classes at night after work because I had to work during the day. She paused. I think I was still waiting for some night when somebody might need me. The entire courtroom went silent. I wasn't pretending to be anyone, Your Honor, Cora said. That number is still mine. I never let it expire. Rocco Vitale's attorney did not sit down. He remained standing for a moment, with one hand resting on the edge of the table. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was gentler now, almost regretful, and that made it more frightening. Your Honor, I withdraw my previous argument concerning the witness's professional standing. I accept that her certification remains valid. He picked up a sheet of paper. But I am required to raise another issue, and I sincerely wish I did not have to. He turned toward the judge. Miss Ashland's professional record contains an internal review. We looked into the reason for that review. It involved a traffic accident, in which she was the first responder on the scene. There were 2 victims that night, and both were members of her immediate family. No one in the courtroom moved. She was alone, and she personally made the decision about which one of them to treat first. The attorney lowered the paper. I am not saying she made the wrong decision. The record states that she followed proper procedure, and I do not dispute that. What I ask the court to consider is something else. The matter before us today depends heavily on this witness's judgment at the scene. So, Your Honor, when a person has once stood before 2 members of her own family and had to choose one of them, should we place complete trust in that person's judgment? Cora stood. She stood because she thought she had to say something, and once she was on her feet, she realized she had nothing to say. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She stood there in the middle of the courtroom, in front of all those people, and for the first time in 3 years, she could not find a single sentence with which to hold herself up. Then a sound came from the back of the room, the sound of wheelchair wheels moving across the wooden floor. Slow, steady, each rotation clearly audible in the silence of the courtroom. People turned. Junie Ashland pushed herself out from the row of seats, turned her wheels, and moved into the center aisle. She stopped there, looked up at the attorney with salt and pepper hair, and asked no one's permission. "The person my sister chose was me." Her voice was strong and clear. "You're standing there asking everyone whether they should trust my sister." She looked directly into his eyes. "And I'm sitting right here." No one in the courtroom said a word. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it, and sat down. In the 4th row, Sloane Marchetti was the first person to lower her face and look at her own hands. Then the people beside her did the same. The judge called a recess, and when she returned, she denied the guardianship petition. She entered into the record that the proposed ward remained mentally competent, that the evidence submitted by the petitioner raised serious concerns regarding both the timing and the manner in which it had been collected, and that the file would be referred to the appropriate authorities for further review of another matter. She did not say what that other matter was. She did not need to. People slowly rose and began filing out. Nico pushed his grandmother's wheelchair down the aisle, and near the door, Rocco Vitali was waiting for him. He was not angry. He calmly fastened the button of his coat, like a man who had just watched a performance that was not to his taste. "You think you saved your grandmother today?" he said. He glanced at the wheelchair, then looked back at Nico. "What you really did was tell this entire city that you have a weak point." Then he walked out and did not look back. 3 weeks later, Nico established a new program. It did not carry his name. It did not carry his family's name. There was no launch event. It was simply a series of short, free classes offered in the evenings and early mornings, teaching restaurant workers, dishwashers, drivers, barbers, parking attendants, the people who were often already at the scene before an ambulance arrived. He found Cora and asked her to teach the classes. "Before you answer," he said, "I want to make one thing clear. You don't owe me anything, and I don't want you taking this job because you feel guilty about me or my grandmother. If any part of you would be doing it for that reason, then don't take it." Cora did not answer him right away. The next day, she took a bus to her old ambulance station and stood across the street looking at it. She remained there for a very long time. Long enough for one ambulance to leave and another to return. Long enough for the morning to become fully bright. Then she crossed the street, walked to the door, and stopped again with one hand resting on the handle without pushing it open. The door opened from the inside. Marisol Reyes stood there holding a cup of coffee, and she looked at Cora for a moment without appearing surprised at all. "Come in, sweetheart," she said. "This door was never locked." Half a year passed. Cora went back to work at her old station on the day shift, and on evenings when she was free, she taught classes. The classes were held everywhere, in hotel staff dining rooms, in storage rooms behind laundromats, in church halls on Sunday mornings. She taught exactly 4 things to do and 3 things never to do, and she made every student repeat them until they could say them without having to think. There was one thing she knew but never paid much attention to. Nico had ordered every person who worked for him to take the course, without exception. Drivers, warehouse workers, people behind the counter at the bakery, security guards, all of them had to complete the class and receive a certificate. Some days she stood in front of a room filled with faces she could tell belonged to his people, and they sat very straight, took careful notes, and she understood why. She never once considered that he might be on that list too. The man who gave the order was naturally outside the order, or so she assumed, and she never thought about it again. That Friday afternoon, Nico came to the apartment in Queens to pick her up for dinner. He arrived about half an hour early, and Cora was still on her way home from the station. Junie opened the door for him, then made him sit in the armchair while she told him about how she had just beaten someone online in an argument about baseball. He had been listening for about 10 minutes when Junie stopped in the middle of a sentence. "Junie?" She didn't answer immediately. She lifted a hand and pressed it against her temple. "My head. It hurts so bad." He stood. Her face had turned bright red, sweat beginning to gather across her forehead and neck while both her hands had gone cold. She closed her eyes. "I can't see clearly." And Nico Vitali, standing in the middle of that small living room, heard inside his head the voice of a woman standing in front of a whiteboard in the storage room behind a laundromat. A person who had used a wheelchair for years, with a spinal cord injury at the thoracic level or above, could develop a complication that almost no one outside the medical field knew about. Sudden, severe headache, flushed face and sweating above the level of injury, blood pressure rising dangerously fast. It could kill someone in less than an hour, and the first thing you had to do was the exact opposite of what every instinct told you to do. Don't lay them down. Sit them upright. Junie, listen to me. He dropped to his knees in front of her. Sit straight up. Don't lean back. I want to lie down. I know, but I need you sitting upright. Right now. He supported her shoulders and pulled her into an upright position, then remembered the second part and lowered the wheelchair footrests so her legs hung down toward the floor. He took out his phone. He made the call, and when the dispatcher answered, he didn't speak like a man in panic. I need an ambulance. He gave the address, the apartment number, and told them that the entrance was level with the sidewalk so a stretcher could be brought straight inside. Female patient, 19 years old, paraplegic, thoracic spinal cord injury, suspected autonomic dysreflexia, sudden severe headache, facial flushing, sweating above the level of injury. I've placed her upright and lowered her legs. Patient is conscious and able to speak. The dispatcher asked when the symptoms had begun. Nico looked down at his wrist. He gave the time. He gave it exactly, without saying around then, without saying probably. Then he sat beside Junie, one hand holding her shoulder so she couldn't slump backward, and he kept talking to her until sirens sounded outside. Cora received the call while sitting on a bus only a few blocks from home. She got off at the nearest stop and ran the rest of the way. When she turned onto her street, the ambulance was already parked outside, its lights still turning, the rear doors open. She rushed toward it, and the first person she saw was her sister sitting on the stretcher with the head raised, awake, irritated, complaining to the paramedic that she didn't need to go to the hospital. The second person she saw was Nico. He stood beside the stretcher with his phone still in his hand, repeating to the paramedic the exact time he had recorded from his watch. Cora stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. She listened until he finished. She heard him use the exact name of the complication, the correct order of actions, the same calm, even voice she taught every student to use. Then he turned and saw her. Junie's all right, he said. They said we caught it early. Cora walked over. She looked at her sister, squeezed her hand once, then turned toward him. Who taught you that? You did. I've never taught you. Nico reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small card, slightly bent at one corner from having spent so long in his pocket. He handed it to her. It was a course completion certificate, printed in advance and filled in by hand. His name was on it. At the bottom, inside the box for the instructor's signature, was her own signature. Cora looked at the date on the card. That day she had taught in a large hall filled with several hundred people, and afterward she had sat for nearly 2 hours signing certificates, one stack after another, without reading a single name. Where were you sitting? She asked. In the last row, Nico said. I told them not to tell you. 1 year later, on a Saturday afternoon, the bakery in Bensonhurst stayed open later than usual because no one was in a hurry that day. Lena came out from the kitchen using a wooden cane, walking a little more slowly than before, but she wouldn't let anyone help her. She leaned the cane against the leg of the table, rolled up her sleeves, and began kneading dough on the wooden surface whitened by decades of flour. Her left hand wasn't as strong as it used to be, so she worked more slowly, humming softly as she went, the same song she had always sung while kneading dough. Cora walked in, still wearing her uniform coat, because she had just finished her shift, and Lena looked up. My girl is here, she said. She managed the entire sentence, slowly, the final word slightly distorted, but clear. At the far end of the bakery, Junie was standing. She held tightly to a metal walker with both hands and managed 3 steps from her wheelchair to the chair beside the window. On the 4th, she dropped heavily into the seat and let out a breath. 4, she said. 3, Cora replied. The last one was a fall. A controlled fall still counts as a step. At the small table beside the front window, a boy of about 10 was sitting with a coloring book. He colored with intense concentration, the tip of his tongue sticking slightly from the corner of his mouth, and every so often he lifted the page to inspect his work before lowering it and continuing. Lena walked past and set a warm croissant on a small plate in front of him. Eat, sweetheart. I just made this. The boy thanked her, took a bite, then picked up his crayon again. His mother sat at the next table drinking coffee, occasionally pointing out a place where he might want to make the color darker. That afternoon, no one in the bakery mentioned anything that had happened before. No one looked at the boy with pity. He was simply a child sitting in a bakery coloring on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, and that was exactly what every adult in the room wanted for him. The classes continued. In a single year, the program had taught thousands of people across the city: servers, drivers, counterworkers, dishwashers. None of them had medical degrees, but emergency calls had been made correctly. Patients had been kept in the proper position instead of being lifted, and exact symptom onset times had been remembered. One evening at a restaurant in the Bronx, a man washing dishes in the kitchen heard a commotion in the dining room, ran out, and did exactly what he had learned in an early morning class. The guest survived. The dishwasher never appeared in the news. He only told the story at the next class, looking slightly embarrassed, and Cora stood listening to him without being able to say anything. That night she worked a late shift. By the time she stepped out of the station, dawn had begun to break. The streets were still quiet, and Nico was waiting across the road with 2 paper cups of coffee from the cart on the corner. He handed her one. "You know I like this cart, because it's cheap, because it's good." They walked for a while. "Do you know what I remember most about that night?" he asked. "I would guess the broken glass." "No." He looked over at her. "You never looked at me. Everyone in that room looked at me before they did anything. You didn't. You only looked at my grandmother." Cora said nothing. She simply reached out and took his hand, and they kept walking along the sidewalk while the city slowly began to wake. This story leaves us with a few very simple truths. A person's worth is not determined by the uniform they are wearing, nor by where they happen to stand in a room. In a room filled with powerful people, the most useful person is often the one no one bothers to notice. And truly loving someone does not mean making decisions for them. It means believing they are strong enough to choose their own life again. The story also reminds us of something very practical. When someone may be having a stroke, look at their face to see whether one side is drooping. Ask them to raise both arms and see whether one falls. Listen to their speech for slurring, and if any of those signs are present, call emergency services immediately, and remember the exact time the symptoms began. Do not give the person water. Do not give them any medication on your own, and do not pull them up by the arms. These are simple things that any of us can learn, and one day they may help a family keep the person they love most. If today's story touched you, please leave a like, share this video with the people you care about, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue listening together to meaningful stories every day. How did the story of Cora and Lena make you feel? What do you think truly saved that woman that night? Please leave a few words in the comments below. We sincerely hope to hear the feelings that come from deep within your hearts. We wish everyone listening to this story lasting health, happiness, and peace in every day of your life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.